welcome to the session on best practices for scalable, agile Appian development. I'm Christina Hajost. I'm an Appian architect here, working with the Department of Defense and our public sector teams. I've been with the firm for about a decade now, which sounds kind of old. Then later on, we'll hear from Tate and Mark and Venkata more on what our different phases for our DevOps cycle is going to be, as well as how Vanguard has got over 130 or 160 applications in production. So for our agenda, I'll cover building and testing phases, and then Tate will cover the deploy monitor phases. Then we'll kind of wrap up with a panel with Vanguard, with Mark and Venkata, and then we'll end with a Q&A and wrap up the next steps. So let's get started with an overview of DevOps. How many of you remember, maybe this was a long time ago, maybe this was kind of recently, buying equipment for your kids or family members' kids? So as a new mother-to-be, it's pretty overwhelming looking at all the equipment that's out there. It's expensive, there's a ton of options. And I see that the latest fad here is getting equipment that grows with your baby. So here you have this awesome crib that has a bassinet, and then it transitions to a mini crib, and then a regular crib, and then toddler bed. And I mean, that kind of makes sense to me. If I'm gonna drop $1,000 in a crib, I wanna make sure it lasts for the whole childhood and any other kids that might come after that. So as I was going through this and researching all the different cribs, I was kind of thinking, just like cribs can grow with your baby or other baby gear, Appian DevOps kind of grows with your applications. So you can think of Appian DevOps going through 4 different phases. It's a solution for small business, mid-size, enterprise, and all the stages in between. There's 4 kind of different stages here that we'll cover today. The first one is build. We deliver value to the user faster so that you can keep giving more value to your customers. The second one is testing. We're improving quality and user experience so we can keep your customers happy. There's deployment. We're reducing manual work to make teams more efficient, and this is freeing them up to solve other problems. And then there's monitor. We're lowering risks and decreasing failures. This keeps your apps running smoothly and allows your manpower to focus on the more difficult tasks. And then all deployment kits are included with the DevOps and Appian. So let's continue to dive into the DevOps capabilities. What exactly is DevOps? I was pretty confused with this term when I first started working here, and I really wish I had this definition to guide me. But it's a set of practices that helps foster a culture of collaboration between the development teams, the dev, and the operation teams, the ops. This will help increase the speed, efficiency, and reliability of software development and delivery. So it's really aiming to encourage collaboration, continuous improvement, and automation. And there are kind of 3 value propositions here. First, it's building applications faster. You're going to save time and money. Second, you're deploying changes confidently. This is reducing mistakes. And then third, you're discovering and solving problems earlier. This allows you to focus on developing business features that your users can really benefit from instead of troubleshooting deployments. There's nothing more frustrating as a developer when you're deploying something and you're really excited about the latest release or product feature that your users get to use, and then you run into an error. There's a missing database script, or there's a missing Appian object or something. And so then you have to spend time troubleshooting that instead of allowing your users to benefit from the latest and greatest solution that you just delivered. So that's a little bit about what DevOps is. So why do you care specifically? What's important about the Appian native DevOps capabilities? We have a couple different things here. We have an integrated development environment, which is really nice. You don't need a swivel chair to go to a different environment to do a deployment or to do testing. It's all within the same place. We have built-in version control. So Appian keeps track of the changes to your objects so you don't have to. We also have streamlined build, test, and deployment processes within Appian. There's also post-deployment processes, deployment governance, automated test executions, and I'll cover some of those a little bit later in the session. There's also CI/CD, which is continuous integration or continuous delivery, a different kind of pipeline. Efficiency gains, automation, governance of agile processes, and monitoring, all which we'll go a little bit more to later in the session. Another really important thing is the auditability and security. So throughout the whole DevOps process, Appian is auditing what is happening with the events and then enforcing security to make sure only the appropriate folks or service roles are executing those events. I know that's been a very important thing in the industry lately is the auditability and security. So this is something that comes out of the platform and is really beneficial. You don't have to configure yourself. So let's dive into testing, especially generative AI testing. And you might have thought maybe you're not getting AI today because it's not on the title, but you're going to get some AI. What is generative AI testing? The value proposition for this is that you're going to have a significant reduction in manual test creation. There are 3 different tools that Appian offers to help with this. There's the Appian AI Copilot. It's an assistant within Appian that leverages AI to help developers or users accomplish tasks more quickly. It gives the developer or user a head start. It's not taking over the task for them. It's a copilot. It's not the pilot. So you and your users still remain in control. There's also sample data. This allows Appian to generate realistic sample data for all of your test cases, so you can focus on other testing tasks. I find this really helpful, so I don't have to think about what are some valid usernames to put in the system, or email addresses or addresses. I just click a couple of buttons, and Appian generates all of that for me, and I can focus on other things and save my brain power for other things. And then there's automated test cases, which we'll talk more about in the next slide. Appian can create robust test cases so that you can focus on the complex testing tasks. So let's see how this works and how AI generates the test cases. There are 4 different inputs that kind of go into this. We have the rules full definition. It's going to look at the data types. It's going to look at the existing test cases, any inline comments that it picks up in the code, which is really convenient, and rule inputs. And then it runs the magic behind the scenes and then spits out some proposed test cases. And once you have those, you can tweak them, you can disregard ones that maybe aren't relevant, so you still remain in control over how you are testing your application. What's really helpful with AI Copilot, it doesn't possess the same in-depth functionality and knowledge that you do. Like, you ultimately know the use case really well, but it's designed to help catch edge cases. So maybe you have scenarios involving null or blank values or unusually large or small data inputs. This is something that the AI Copilot testing is going to help capture. And again, you can discard things that aren't relevant to you and make sure the tests are relevant to your application. So let's see this in action. So we're going to generate test cases. It does the magic behind the scenes. It's going to have a nice list of all the different test cases here. You select what you want. In this case, I want all of them. And then once you add it to your rule, you can go in and tweak the different test cases here. Delete, add more, do whatever you need. And this is one of my favorite features. I really wish we had this 10 years ago when I started developing. I was missing a lot of edge cases in my testing scripts. And then Appian AI Copilot would have helped me catch those and learn a little bit quicker. My tech lead or user acceptance testing eventually caught those bugs. I don't think I broke production of it, but we'll see. So that's Appian generative AI testing. How about third-party tools? What exists outside of Appian that you can integrate with? So here's a quick overview of Appian integrations of third-party testing tools. We provide supported plugins for functional testing tools. This is available on the Appian app market. And what's really great about this is that as we evolve or introduce new components to the platform, these tools are kept up to date, so your scripts will continue to run after a platform upgrade. That way, as you get the latest and greatest version of Appian, you know your scripts are going to continue to work, and you don't have to go and rewrite all of them. You might have heard of Fitness, Cucumber, or Selenium. Those are UI testing tools. And then Locus would be a performance testing tool. So as someone working with Department Defense, which are large, complex user bases, is enterprise applications, I can really attest to the helpfulness of these tools to make sure that everything's running smoothly. They really help you catch any UI issues or performance issues. I know we all love slow applications, so that's something that's really important to catch for your users. And these tools help ensure that your users have the best possible experience. So now I'll pass it to Tate to talk about deployment. Thanks, Tate.
Great, thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. My name is Tate Erickson. As Christina alluded to, I'm a principal consultant for Appian. Been with us for almost 4 years. First portion of my career was focused on expert delivery for commercial accounts. And then the last year or so, I've been focusing on DoD account advisory with Christina. And so if anyone is positioned to talk about this topic, I think I am at least adjacent to that person. So, talking about third-party CID tools and deployment, continuing in with Christina's opening theme of no one-size-fit tool is going to be perfect for all situations. That is exactly the same case with our pipeline. And so I can, again, speak to that from my personal experience. The first 2 years, I was focusing on 8-week projects where in 8 weeks, we would scope out, build, deploy, and go live with an application, which is an incredibly fast timeline. Now we're talking at the federal department and DoD about multi-year engagements where you might not see an app go live after a year. And so even though the requirements and builds may be virtually identical, the reality is that the pipeline could be vastly different. And so, looking at all those factors, what makes a pipeline different? What makes it applicable to some users, to some environments, and not others? You have a lot of factors that could go with, some as significant as financial considerations, some as requirements and legal considerations. You can imagine for Department of Defense accounts, there's all sorts of auditing and validations that need to occur that maybe Appian out of the box isn't providing. And so therefore, all of these things need to be a factor when you decide what is your pipeline going to look like. Now, as a company, and as my prior experience in delivery for commercial, I can tell you that the out-of-the-box compare and deploy functionality is going to be sufficient for a lot of situations. And as the best part of that is always from a development standpoint, right? We talk about what is free, what has a time cost or a value cost. Out-of-the-box free is always going to be a competitive offer. However, for these large engagements, like what you're going to hear about from Vanguard, these are usually going to have issues that would prevent you from deploying or maybe have auditing considerations. And therefore, Appian has built in a lot of third-party support via our APIs and webhooks. And so to give you kind of an example of what you might see out in the wild for these large organizations, we have a flow here on the left that talks about both the manual and automated processes that might be in your pipeline. And you can see here that there's 3 integrations that we're looking at. We have our fitness for script management and automated testing. We have our GitLab for version control and for publishing and pushing. And then finally, we have Jenkins, which is demonstrating kind of the governance and the overall processes of managing change requests and those details. And so this is just one example of what might you see in the wild. I will say from our experience, these are probably the most common integrations we see and all provide a lot of value. However, this pipeline, as you see representative, is ultimately very flexible, right? This is one path that we recommend, and this is one way that you could implement integrations. This is truly a scenario where the limitation is your creativity and what partners you want to see. We always advise seek out the app market and the community to see what other companies are doing and what works well for them. And so to kind of bring this whole presentation back together, right, I wanted to show what a representation of a fully automated pipeline may look like. And so here you can see 3 major components. We have first and foremost the latest features of Appian, which are always going to be helpful to get you closer to the end. We have automated testing, not unlike what Christina was discussing with generative AI, building test cases, or fitness, or another tool doing it. And then finally, we have an automated deployment capability. Now, this pipeline is kicked off by just a single event. Someone creates the code, and then they push it to their VCS, at which point the entire process executes smoothly. It never breaks. You never have problems. Everyone's happy, right? Probably not, but at least sometimes. And so for large-scale organizations, you can consider that this would be a substantial return on investment, right? We talk about the time to spin up this environment, spin up the pipeline, maybe work with your license, with your vendors, however you get these approaches and tools in place. And then you have the ability to push a button and run it through. However, as an advisory service, we always want to discuss, is this a solution that makes sense for you and your organization? Because while when this works, this can save you an incredible amount of time, that always comes at a cost. And primarily the cost in this case is going to be the complexity of the pipeline, right? The pipeline is supposed to be making your life easier, making your support less demanding. And so when complexity works well, it can absolutely do that. When you're adding complexity that does not fit the scale or the operations, then you're talking about intentionally or unintentionally making your deployment process harder to support and easier and more prone to failure. And so ultimately, what this always comes down to me when I reach new accounts and new customers, when we have this discussion, is we say, what are you doing right now? And would the adoption of the out-of-the-box compare and deploy be better than what you're doing today? Because if the answer is yes, then that's going to be a fantastic starting point for 90% of our customers. And then as we deploy more, as we build more applications, that's when we start having conversations about where do we want to automate, where do we want to build your pipeline in the end, so that this is not a painful process every single time. And we take those learning lessons, we take all the reflection from our Agile process, and we bake it into the pipeline itself. So the last point of this phase that we want to talk about is going to be the monitoring component. This is certainly not the least important, but this is one that is often overthought or maybe underthought, depending on the company. And so as you probably have heard throughout Appian world, or at least the last couple of days, Appian strives for speed to value, as frankly everyone in the software industry does, and especially everyone in low code. What I would say is a differentiator for Appian versus others is the maturity in the platform and the capabilities that come out of the box, right? And so it's one thing for us to have all of these suites of tools that can help you monitor, help you build, help support your testing. But if these tools are not coming to you right away or out of the box or require all sorts of hoops to jump through, then you're probably not deploying them. And so this is a really big factor. And as someone who did delivery hands-on with customers, I can tell you that these features are going to be critical for the ultimate success of the application, for meeting those aggressive timelines, and then ultimately for the long-term sustainment of an application. And we'll hit more about that later as we go through each one. The last thing I want to say, though, everything that we're going to cover for the next couple of slides is going to be out of the box ready from day one, no extra action required from your developers or any licensing considerations. So let's jump right into the first one, which is our real-time application performance monitoring. Appian developers have access to what this tool is, which is essentially a centralization of our performance-focused tools so that you can review, test, and highlight critical performance considerations and critical user experiences. As you can see on the screen, there's numerous factors of data being captured here, all sorts of breakdowns in terms of what you're looking at, how you're looking at it, and details that would help a user test. But just to kind of exemplify what is available through this tool, you can use this tool to do something simple as gauging application-wide performance. So that's every single query for your record, for your database, for anything in that category, all the way down to seeing what was the user experience when they pulled up that one graph that one time. As you can imagine, for a developer who is otherwise relying on word of mouth or testing tickets or bug tickets, the ability for me to say, I heard John had an issue on Tuesday with this specific process, the ability to go into this tool, check for John's results, see a specific process, and then see the performance without relying on feedback or conversations with the developer is a really powerful real-time resolution to get to what we need. The other pact as a dev lead is that this raises the floor and the consistency of my dev team, right? When I know that there's production performance tools like this sitting available for our developers, that means that if one of my new developers is struggling with the performance of a query, instead of having them go work and partner with my other developer, they can sit down, review queries that were written by me or my other more senior developer, and copy it directly, or maybe even leverage it where they didn't need to recreate it, but they did because they didn't see it was missing. And so one of the key attributes you're going to see throughout the rest of these presentations from me is the emphasis on what raises the baseline for my team and makes all of our lives easier day to day so that we're not always revisiting code or learning the same lesson multiple times. So our next focus is going to be on the test case coverages, or our rule test coverage. This is going to be well aligned to what Christina was mentioning earlier with generative AI building these cases for you automatically, or users are viewing and creating their own to supplement it. What we're looking at here, though, is the centralization of all of those tools for any given application in one screen. So you can imagine if you had hundreds of test cases because all of your developers are following best practices and creating them, I can go to one page and see every single test case for every single object in my application at once. And from there, I can do things like I can manage my test cases, I can create new ones, I could execute the test cases all at once for the entire application for an ad hoc review, or I could also just review the outcomes and see what's happening. This is an incredibly powerful feature that really helps our developers do a couple of things at once. First and foremost is it allows us to see how is our application going over each iteration. And so in some sense, this could be complementary to your regression script testing, because what now I can do is anytime I make a change to an object that has an underlying dependency, I can see right away, did that change break this other object or have another unintended consequence without relying on my testers or regression testing scripts to catch those errors. The second big functionality of it is it reinforces our best practices as a dev team, right? We know that when I go into my object and I create a test rule, that is part of my expected behavior, my dev norms or my definition of done, however it's been implemented. And I, as the dev team lead, can go in and review all of my objects and see, were we creating test cases correctly? Do we have them in place? Are we following those foundations? And the last big element of this is that these test cases are going to promote with my objects directly. And so, for example, instead of having to create a test case in dev and then create a new test case in our testing environment in our prod, I have one test case that will promote up the entire pack. So here's our third element that I wanted to highlight today, which is our security summary audit. This is another piece of functionality accessible at either the application level or the platform-wide level. And what we're doing here is we're capturing two major uses, one of which is I have built an object and I have unintentionally blocked out every single user from it. And the other one is I have built an object and I have opened it to the entire platform, perhaps exposing security or data that should not be exposed. Both are very significant, and frankly, you might be surprised how often the first one happens. We do see it quite often where your developers are testing as production admin users. They're not looking in the right lens, and so this will save you quite a bit of time. The other thing that I'll raise as kind of a dev team perspective on this is that this is time where if my security team comes to me or a third-party audit comes to me and they say, I need to know how many users have access and what access they have, instead of having to do the line-by-line object audit, I can take a screenshot of this, send it to the auditor or the third-party security person, and get our dev team back to work developing code and not sitting and talking to our security team about this level of detail, which that can save a significant amount of time in any given sprint. And so here's our final highlight for the presentation, which is going to be on the native design guidance. This was certainly picked last for a reason, and that is because every interface, every rule, every key object that our development team creates is going to have native design guidance built directly into it. And so what does native design guidance give you? This provides our developers with critical warnings, recommendations, and suggestions for best practices. So that not only does this prevent our developers from unintentionally pushing out objects that would break this code or other code, it's also going to be subtly reinforcing best practices that otherwise your dev team would be doing or your team norms would be doing. So a great example of what you can see here, you have an unused local variable as a recommendation. This would be a great example of common tech debt that we see when building an Appian and other codes. For anyone not familiar with the concept tech debt, what we're essentially talking about is code that does not break or necessarily harm the user experience right away, or maybe it's a subtle harm, but it's in the code and it's basically a long-term risk to the build, right? So you can imagine while having an unused local variable in an object does not actually prevent the object from working correctly, what it does do is it builds code over and over again, layers it on top that is not in use, and eventually someone makes the mistake of assuming this variable was used, and it adds it and relies on it, and now that object is not going to work because it's not there. And so this is just one example of tech debt, where by having our native design guidance built into the objects directly, you can have confidence that your developers are following those best practices, or at the very least, they're going to be warned right on the page about all the things that they maybe have not thought through yet, or your dev team has not standardized as a group. And so as a dev lead, knowing that this design guidance is built into the objects, what that means is as a team, we can have the standard to say, whenever your stories are done, as part of your definition of done, you need to make sure there are no warnings or recommendations in your objects. That subtle language will prevent a substantial amount of errors and issues and warnings. And most importantly, for the product users in our audience, it means that that application is going to have less tech debt, require less hardening, and more importantly, is less likely to have a larger issue down the road as you continue to build your applications. Okay, and so that actually concludes the presentation portion of this session. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move into our panel discussion. I'm going to ask for our two gentlemen from Vanguard to join us on the stage. Invite Mark and Venkata up to the stage. All right, thank you both for joining us. Mark, can you kick us off with an introduction?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mark Valeris. I'm the manager of Vanguard's Workflow Solutions team. We are the cross-divisional group of managed service. We're a managed service team providing cross-divisional support, generally in Appian, building out a number of applications. My team currently supports 46 production applications, and we're a fairly small Agile team of about 4 developers, a tech lead, a PO, and a offshore support team.
Great, thank you. And Venkata?
Thank you. My name is Venkata Chigurupati. I am the Senior Delivery Manager for Workflow and Contact Center applications at Vanguard. We support our Financial Advisory Services division. I am using Appian. My teams are using Appian for the last 7+ years, and it's a great experience so far.
Great, thank you both. So to help set the stage for our discussion on the impact and value you all have achieved, could you please give the audience an overview of the scale and scope of Appian usage at Vanguard.
Yeah. So in 2016, Appian was brought into Vanguard by a team owned by Vanguard. And in traditional fashion, we started with one of the most complex possible options in a replacement of AWD. That went fairly well, and it has since expanded as a program. We now have 10 production instances, 8 are divisionally aligned. One is our citizen development instance, and then the other is our cross-divisional instance that my team manages. On those 10 instances, we now have 165 production applications live, and about 20 development teams that are Appian enabled. Doesn't necessarily mean that they do Appian every day, but they are capable of developing in Appian and working on those apps.
Okay, that's great. So considering this extensive footprint, what have been the most significant impacts that you all have realized by leveraging Appian so broadly?
Yeah. I would say our most significant impacts are in agility in meeting our business needs, and also improving our overall operational efficiencies. And when it comes to the value, we realized value in a number of different ways. I will highlight three points. One is in the time it takes to process our transactions, reduce overall risk associated with our transactions, and also improving the accuracy of our transactions. And prior to onboarding Appian, we used a legacy workflow system which has a standard steps like get work, assign work, process work, complete work. It worked well, but at the same time, it has a rigid standard steps for all types of transactions. And there is a very little variation between transaction to transaction. And when it comes to the Appian, due to its low-code nature and easy to develop custom features, now it is allowing us to develop a detailed custom workflows for each transaction to meet its complex needs. And also it is helping us to integrate with our various processing systems much more easily. So this development of custom workflow steps and integration with our processing systems through APIs are reducing the overall risk associated with the transaction and also improving our efficiency. So now it's taking less time to process our transactions compared to past.
Yeah, I would just add that overall the understanding of the shared nature of some of the components and the reusability of the components you build in Appian, once there was a sort of acceptance and understanding and pattern around that, really accelerated the development.
Yeah, that's great. And so how has Appian enabled your teams to reach these wide ranges of accomplishments, including even supporting a citizen development initiative, which I know a lot of people are trying to replicate?
Yeah, for our team, we, as a managed service team, we get requests for applications. So every application request that comes in gets vetted out. We do a fit assessment for Appian and for a number of other products to see if it might be a better fit somewhere else in our tech stack. We then do a value assessment, even if it's not a fit for Appian, just to see if it's a high value piece of work that we should support and facilitate. And then it goes into our pipeline if it is a good fit. And we've created a pretty robust value pipeline at this point. So a lot of the teams that are coming to us don't have the resources or the funding to build out the app, but we can realize that value still by fitting them nicely into our pipeline. For the citizen development side of things, we did realize that there were some high value apps that we weren't taking on because they had their own full stack development team.
Right.
And so, the question was, should they really build it in Appian? Should they be doing something on their own? Those teams kept coming to us and asking if they could start using Appian. So we stood up a citizen development environment. We started with case management because that allowed some of the business users to get hands-on. But we quickly opened it up to development teams that were full stack that had their own teams. We put one of our developers 50% time over top of the first project that we did in citizen development, but they built it all themselves. Took them about 6 to 8 weeks to build out our production readiness application, so it evaluates whether or not a product or platform is ready to, has gone through all the assessments at Vanguard. That application is projected to save about $2.2 million and is expected to go live next week. And really all our team had to do, because we have such limited resources, that lets us scale. we can put one of our 4 people 50% over that. They can help with the more complex questions, some of that design work, some of the sprint 0 work, just to understand what it is that they want to build that we excel at, and really then just leave it to the talents that they have, and they've done an exceptional job.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Incredible outcome. And so can you share an example of how Appian has specifically improved your speed to market or overall business agility versus traditional methods?
Yeah, I can take that question. When we onboarded Appian, we intentionally chose a very complex application to onboard with Appian. And we started with a complex transaction. We chose that one to mainly test the suitability of Appian to our enterprise needs. And it took multiple months to develop that particular transaction. It's mainly took more time to develop enterprise integrations that meets our enterprise controls. Even though it took much time to develop that application, we got a huge benefit out of it in our subsequent developments. So our first application took multiple months. Now we are able to develop our applications in weeks. So now we are months to the weeks. And so since our time it takes to develop the applications are now in weeks, now it is opening like a lot of newer opportunities for us. So we mainly choose our application priorities based on the return on investment. If it takes months, return on investment may not be great. If it only takes weeks to develop our applications, now we are seeing more and more use cases that can be onboarded by using Appian. And we recently replaced a number of email inboxes with automated workflows. Our business is very happy. It's not only brought automated workflows to their team, Appian is also providing data reporting and better audit controls. So I would say it's a huge win for our business unit.
Yeah, and to add to just more specific on some of the items that you presented, we have taken full advantage of, because we're working on so many applications at different times, we actually had been pretty slack on writing test cases and the like. So we've taken full advantage. If you're ever in an object where you don't have test cases, you auto-generate the test cases. We're taking full advantage of the AI-generated test data to do both performance testing and just to use in our demos so that they look more realistic for our clients, or to populate a UAT system before they get there. So really, all of those things have accelerated our team a great deal. And then CI/CD pipeline, hooking that directly up to ServiceNow for our change records so that those immediately get put out and on the right application prefix, and everything is already set up. Those have all made us go a lot faster as a team.
Yeah, and I imagine it sounded like it was kind of an incremental change, right?
Yeah. That CI/CD pipeline is helping us large. And earlier, it used to take 3 months to do an elevation. We used to have hardening sprint, development sprint, testing sprints. Now those days are gone.
Wow.
We are doing huge pieces of functional elevations every week, and some of our teams are even doing elevations on average 1 a day.
Yeah, we're up at about 10 a week, sometimes more. And just because it is so many apps, and it is a customized version of the automated deployment manager it even has the embedded test case execution and,
that's great.
And things like that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So can you provide an example of when an Appian application delivered transformative results or fundamentally improved a key business process?
Yeah, I can take that one. So when we developed the applications by using Appian, earlier we used to have a lot of head rules. And we used to have manual sorters that has to understand the type of the transaction that coming into the system. They have to understand all the team members that can process these transactions. So they have to understand the transaction and the associates that they can process, and also their availability. So in the initial days of Appian development, we developed a very complex algorithm that can understand the transaction, and also Appian helped us in having the proper skill set that assigned to each associate. Now this algorithm is matching the transaction characteristics with associate characteristics, and it is identifying the right associate at the right time to process the transaction. that brought like a lot of operational efficiencies into our organization.
Yeah, that's good. We hear that story a lot, honestly. That's good
Yes.
to hear.
And in general, there's a lot of room for enterprise thinking in our line of work. We get asked to build apps all the time. Sometimes they come from teams that sound like they're doing similar functions. And I'm not familiar with every area of the business. Vanguard is vast. So we have those candid discussions. It gives us an opportunity. We had a group from one of our advice teams come to us and say, hey, we need a new ticketing system. We've been using SharePoint for a while. I went out to try to find their submission form, and I found 11 others, which were related to other advice teams that were not necessarily all under the same umbrella at the time.
Right.
We found out through some discussions that they occasionally got each other's tickets just because of a little bit of confusion. So we started talking to those other teams. We realized the high value in delivering the first team. Then we made it into a program. So we've started to approach it from a program point of view across a couple of different application sets where we see that they're associated. We can now build these apps on common infrastructure. They can now transfer tickets seamlessly between all of the applications, but they still all have their own custom application workflows. So they are still siloed, but they're now fully integrated.
Yeah.
So it has been very helpful to sort of have those higher level conversations with the teams that we're working with to see if there's more that we can do that they haven't identified yet.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So Mark, you mentioned earlier that Vanguard has over 165 production applications, which is a considerable amount to say the least. And you also mentioned multiple instances. Can you speak to how Appian's flexibility has enabled this portfolio?
Yeah, we've really been able to, the striations that came about were in part a little bit from contracting, but generally they are subdivisionally aligned. And that has allowed a lot of ownership on the teams that control those instances. So we do have an AEC that sits over top, sets best practices for everyone. And there's always a place to go for that additional support. And we have a series of meetings where you can get federated support. But that ownership, I think, is very important for those individual subdivisions to determine what it is that they want to build, what direction they want to go in with integrations and value, how they want to do sizing, and where they think that that application should fit. It also lets us distribute our user base appropriately for better distribution of cost and total cost of ownership.
Okay, great.
I would touch on the Appian flexibility and how it's helping various subdivisions also. Like by using Appian, it's easier to integrate with the other ecosystems. And we are all experimenting AI and we are all in the at various journey points, right? So Appian is providing a flexibility to us, like we are able to integrate with our existing AI engines when they exist at the enterprise level. And also now we are developing a good number of new features by using the latest AI features that are available in Appian. Yeah. So Appian provides a flexibility to use your own engine when it's available or use the Appian out of the functionality to develop new features. And we are seeing like a lot of new opportunities to use the case summarization, document summarization, and chat features. Yeah. And it's going to, in our initial POC environments, we are seeing like huge value. It is reducing the time it takes to understand the documents. We get like huge documents, 100-page documents, 150-page documents. So getting the synopsis of document is really helping our associates. And also it's going to help our leader reviews and auditor reviews. Now they no longer has to read the entire document or look at all the comments. If you look into the case summary or the chat feature, you can ask the questions, who processed this case, what's the NIGO reason? It's going to help us a lot.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll throw in another silly one, but we spent years integrating all of the referential data into our system because we have so many different applications supporting different groups. Everybody needs different enterprise data. When we stood up the citizen development environment, we realized everybody's still going to want all of that referential data. So rather than reintegrating all of that and going through all of the same things, we've opened up endpoints to our existing environment, so they're actually just pulling that referential data from our workflow solutions environment. So minor flexibility, seems silly, but saved us a lot of time.
Yeah, like tremendous amount of time. Right?
Yeah, maybe a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both. Again, that was great. I really enjoyed that conversation. We have a little bit less than 5 minutes remaining. And so at this point, we're going to open up for QA. And Christina's going to read through some questions that we have. And then just on the screen, for anyone curious, feel free to scan those QR codes and get some additional information. But otherwise, I'll hand it to Christina.
All right, so the first two questions are kind of the same, but are there any product plans for branching or multi-object version tagging, enabling branching concepts in Appian DevOps? And I can take this one. Ideally, yes, there are plans. I don't have an exact timeline. I know there's not like true branching. It's not quite the same way as you would use Git or like a different kind of version control system. So I guess the answer is yes, but I don't know when.
Yes, and I would add to that our CS group is constantly pushing these as high priority product issues. If you were working with a CS member, please feel free to ask them for a product use case. It's one of our favorite things to do is create a product use case and then go bother engineering to see it prioritized. And so this is definitely one that on the expert delivery side, we feel is high priority. So love to see more and more product use cases.
Yeah, pile on, more customers.
Vanguard is on that case. Please put yourselves on that case.
Okay,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, and the next one here is, what is the actual mechanism that teams use to check Appian code into a VCS? Are you exporting the package or application through the UI? I can also take this one. So we have API deployment endpoints that will take the package or the different objects and do that export for you. So you don't have to go in and manually do it. If you wanted to go in and manually do it and then like dump it into Git or something, you could also do that. But if you integrate with our existing API deployment endpoints, or deployment and integration endpoints, you can have that automated yourself. Okay, this one's actually from me, but what's been for Vanguard, what's been the hardest part of enabling citizen development, and what's been the easiest?
The easiest part is setting people free to do what they want.
Okay.
But the hardest part is really the governance and where to draw the line on governance. So we made a choice to say that governance is about stability of the environment in our citizen development environment. We will vet the teams that are being onboarded, right? They have to go through an onboarding process. We do want to hear about their use cases, but we don't want to stop people from exploring and building, especially if they have a full stack team that has availability. So we want them to get there quickly, but from a governance perspective, what we're doing when we evaluate, when we do code reviews, and when we do the promotion for them, we do have a promotion gate. That what we're looking at is, could it be in any way detrimental to any of the other apps in that environment? Is it using too many resources? Have they ever decided to do some kind of looping thing? If their volume increases significantly, when do we need to be concerned so that we can keep eyes on that? So really it's light overhead at this point because we only have 3 teams working in the SIT dev environment, but we hope that it will scale well and we'll just adapt to adjust that program as we learn from our own mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, was there any lessons learned or pain points that you discovered right out of the gate that might be applicable to others looking to spin one up?
Yeah, I think it's more about the clarity. So we really need to have everybody on the same page once they're onboarded, where they're supposed to work, what they should or shouldn't touch, just being conscious of the other members from other teams that they might never speak to who are changing objects. There wasn't a problem, but we kept getting questions like, what's this object? And you're like, that's something another team built.
Don't worry about that.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, some of the best practices we can implement is like having a separate region for the applications that are developed by citizen developers is going to be helpful. So it's better not to mix and match business critical applications with applications developed by citizen developers. And now I am started considering myself as a citizen developer, and I got the opportunity to test the Appian Composer. It's becoming much more easier to become a citizen developer in the future. My business teams are asking, we are an Appian team and Appian manager, can I get an intake system for my team? Yeah. We didn't develop it because we have a lot of critical business needs. Now by using Appian Composer, we can develop the intake process much more easily.
Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
we expect to encourage citizen developers to use all of those new features to, to see what they come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we are officially at time now, so I wanted to thank again everyone for their time, as well as the gentlemen for joining us.